Welcome back as we talk a little bit more about some more properties of real numbers. Before we started talking about some things like rational and irrational and what a terminating or a repeating decimal would be. Now we're going to kind of take that a little bit more to a step further, talk a little bit about some of the properties of real numbers. This just takes kind of some getting used to. It's not crank it out math like we normally do. It's just some things that you get used to, and they start to make sense the more you play with them. For instance, here, the commutative property, okay? We're doing some switching around. Now, one thing I like to add in here is, I like to call this the order property. Now, you can't write it on your paper as the order property, but here's what I mean. Notice on all of these, the order of the terms is just switched around. Okay, here I'm adding them, they switch around. I'm multiplying them, I'm just switching them around. Here, the only difference is I switch the 3 and the 4. So the order changes, and I'll kind of tell you how that helps me to memorize this here in just a minute. Associative property, same type of idea, except the parentheses now are moving. The order doesn't change, but the grouping does. And people tend to get these two mixed up. So here's what I tend to look at here. Again, same terms, same order, just move the parentheses. Okay, I get the same answer either way too. Same terms, same order, move the parentheses. I like to look at this as the associative property is grouping. AG, all good. The associative property is all good. And if you can remember all good, then you're like, oh yeah, associative is the one where it's grouped different. The parentheses are there. The order one is CO. Now, I don't know if you can come up with some word with co. I'm not sure. But that's the way I would look at those two to try and help myself remember. The rest of these are basically common sense. The identity property. Well, if you identify something, you see it for what it is. Well, if I take a number and I add 0 to it, I get the number back. Okay, if I take a variable, I add 0 to it, I get the number back. When I'm multiplying, if I multiply something by 1, I get the number back. Or a variable, I get the number back. You identify the number because you're really not doing anything to change it. Okay. Inverse. Inverse is just a fancy word for reverse. So when I take 4 and I add its inverse or its reverse, I get 0. If I take x and add its inverse or reverse, I get 0. Same idea works with multiplying. If I take a number, and again, any whole number can be made to be over 1, I multiply it by its inverse or its flip. I get the number back. Take a fraction, flip it over. Again, I can always make a whole number a fraction by putting it over 1. I get the same thing back. Same with variable terms. Okay? Multiplicative property of 0. You multiply something by 0, you always get 0. Okay? That makes sense. Multiply 0, you get 0. Can't think of anything easier to call that. And then the distributive property you've been doing forever. You take what's on the outside of the parentheses or your quantity, multiply it. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 3 is 6. Okay. 4 times 5x is 20x. 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. And we just want to be able to notice those right away so we can remember how these things go together. The only thing I keep reminding people is, remember, commutative and associative only go with adding and multiplying. Because there's a difference if I do, 2 plus negative 7 or negative 7 plus 2, that can be kind of different, so just be careful. So name the correct property. So you've got yours in front of you now. We can take a peek at some of these. We're not going to do them all, but we're going to get an idea of what's going on here. So the first one, all my terms are the same, but they're grouped differently. All good. Associative. Okay, you don't have to write it completely out, enough that I can figure out what you're up to here. Multiply something by 0, I get 0. Which one's that? Multiplication property is 0. And if you just want to do it the mult prop of 0, that's okay. What's going on here? Same numbers, but the order has switched. That's the commutative property. Take something, add 0, get it back. Oh yeah, I can identify or identity property on that one. Take a number, multiply it by itself. What do I get back? It's the identity. Okay. And I start to kind of get into a roll with some of these. I'm like, all right, let's see. Ooh, I just switched the order. Oh, when I switch the order, that's all good. You're like, wait a minute, what? That's grouping, Mr. H, and you're right. You almost let me slip a fast one on you there. That's the commutative property again, similar to what we had up in number 3, except now, instead of multiplying, I'm adding. Okay, number 7. Now this one's a little trickier. The 24s are the same. You're like, but this is different. So if the whole problem was just 8 plus negative 8 equals 0, which one would you pick? Inverse. Okay, so this is going to be an inverse. If you want to put the plus for addition, you can. Here, multiplying a number and its inverse. So again, that's going to be inverse, but it'd be with multiply. Here, to get from here to here, I had to multiply the 7 times the 5 and the 7 times the 6. So that's the distributive property. Now here again, be cautious. Is the grouping changed or is the order changed? Parentheses are still around the 3 plus 2, but now it's moved from the back end of the problem to the front end. So now we're looking at order, which is commutative. And finally, we get here to the end. The order's the change. It's still 8, then 7, then 2, but my parentheses have moved. The grouping is changed, which makes it associative. And again, this just takes a little while to get used to. So just kind of keep working at it, and I'm sure you'll do a good job. But as always, if you have questions, let me know.